Yeah, so basically from the butternut side, what you guys are here to see today, we're obviously interested in helping to save the species, right, and bring it back. So one of the things that we're working with is going out into the field and working with different organizations to find canker-tolerant species of trees. And then we have butternut assessors, such as Greg here, that go out into the field to try to find an archivable tree. From that point, if we do find one that's archivable, we try to get scions off of it, or cuttings. We take back, we bring them to our nurseries, we graft them, put them into our archives, and then grow them up so hopefully one day we can get seed. So this year we actually had a bumper crop for the first time out in the Ottawa area. So we had about 3,000 seeds. Anyone that hasn't seen one, seeds are like this. And then hopefully one day we'll replant those seeds into seedlings. This is an example of one we got from last year that we'll hopefully be able to introduce into the environment in the years to come. So,
thanks, Greg. So what we'll do now is let's take a walk up and take a look at examples of cankered tree. And guys, butternut canker, you guys may or may not have seen trees on your property. So the canker, it's a fungus. It's found all across northeastern North America. Discovered down in the States a number of decades ago, and it's airborne. It's probably on a lot of the spores are probably sitting on a lot of the trees around here. But just to show you, this is heavily loaded, but yet it still has a crown. It's still alive. But black sooty patches, elliptical cankers. So you have sooty patches and cankers on a good example on this tree. In the springtime, it may ooze like black material, sap out of the bark. It starts up in the crown and moves down into the bole of the tree, like it kills cambium layer. So as these cankers coalesce together all around the tree, it stops the flow of water and nutrients up into the crown. And I don't know, has everyone seen canker on butternut trees on their property or anywhere else? Yeah. So
what happens to the leaves? Do they curl up?
No, it just
Stop coming.
It just as it stops the flow, parts of the tree starts to die back. You'll get what we call epicormic branching, like here. So as the crown dies, the tree's trying to struggle. So you'll see a lot of epicormic branching pop out all around the side of the tree, and the thing about butternut trees is that you can collect the seed. We collect scions, but to cut down a butternut tree legally, you should have your tree assessed, and this tree could be considered what we would call a non-retainable tree, class 1 tree. So you could then remove it. So having somebody come in, somebody who's been trained at doing a butternut health assessment, such as Eleanor and probably some other people here are also do that. I'm an assessor as well. So we'll talk about this later, but there's a protocol you follow to decide whether or not you're looking at a category 1, 2, or 3 tree and whether it's retainable or not. So yeah. So you guys, we're in the land between, as they call this area, up in Cobeconk, north of Bob Cajun area. So if you look at the bare limestone, and it's quite interesting to see this tree. It's been growing here for a number of years. I don't know, it's probably 70, 80 years old. I don't know. It's hard to say, but you can see it's declining. You can see what I call epicormic branching is occurring, but we can't see any canker on this tree. You guys can have a look if you like. So it could probably be just the site, we've had several dry summers, but this tree has been in decline for a number of years. So there probably is canker there for sure, but there isn't really any real canker load like we saw on the other tree there. But I just wanted to show this tree too as an example. it's growing out in the open, and that's what butternut wants. It wants to grow out in the open. You'll find butternut trees along fence rows, along edges of streams. You'll find it in the forest, but there may have been a disturbance of some sort. And one of the trees we'll look at, the butternut is a larger diameter to what a lot of the other trees all around it are. So something happened in the past, you know, whether it was clearing or something had occurred. The other thing I wanted to mention is the type of soil. So here we are, there's really basically hardly any soil, but I mean it does like to grow in really nice rich loams, but you also find it on these rocky conditions like along the Niagara Escarpment, up here in the land between.
What we are finding in our habitat studies is that even though we do see regeneration in the wild, first they're 3-year-old trees that are popping up. Typically, a lot of them don't survive, and it's because for that first 1 to 3 years, the nut has enough energy to keep the plant going, and once that nut's done, all the energy's been expended, the tree's by itself, right? So that's where it needs to have the light and the proper environment around it to be able to continue to grow. So if you do have a woodland where there's a lot of competition, basswoods, hickory, sugar maple for sure, you see a lot of that, or even ground covers, prickly ash, buckthorn we talked about, things like that. It's enough to obviously get in there and cramp it out, they'll die off real quick. So as landowners, anything that we can do to selectively thin helps out the tree a lot. And again, when we do that, we don't want to thin too much too fast because butternut doesn't like that either. But selectively year over year, taking some away so it has room to grow and has some light to get at it, definitely a help.
And when we're collecting our scions, you know, we hire arborists to do that. They use ropes. They don't. I mean, they climb with ropes. So you got to get up into the top of the crown. We want to collect from the very top where there's the male and female flowers. So, yeah.
I have a question related to the forest around it, and one of my colleagues at Fleming College claimed that where you find hickory is where you would find butternut, that the two seem to go together. So have you, and we have, I mean, I know
there's a lot of hickory on
there's
this
a lot
property.
of hickory here.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder if you have seen that correlation, or have heard that, or know that, or is there any?
Haven't heard of it in the study that we've done so far, and again, it's only the first kick of the can that we actually tried this year. But we did find a lot of bitternut hickory.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, so mostly overstory trees, bitternut hickory, some elm, a lot of basswood, a lot of sugar maple for sure. And as Craig said, around the trees, a lot of pagoda dogwood, friendly is mostly common in the areas.
So this is a pretty ugly tree, but I mean it's interesting. And then what we're going to go to take a look at a very healthy looking tree that's just down around the corner here. Here's a butternut tree. It's an example of a very healthy one. There's very little, like it's a bit damp, you know, from the rain that we had, but really I can't find any canker on the bole except down around the root flare, and you look up in the crown looks really healthy. Like if we were going to do a percent live crown, I'd say you're 95, almost 100% live crown up in the top there. One thing I noticed, and I think Eleanor you did too, the bark is a little bit unusual looking. It's not your typical butternut. Butternut can be very shallow and oftentimes light colored, or somewhat deep and darker. And this is just, I mean, it's a bit wet too, so it doesn't really lend itself today. But you know, when I first saw this tree, I'm wondering, it looks very healthy, so you know, is it a hybrid? And I've given some of you people have taken copies of, you know, do you have a native butternut tree? And in there they talk about the different things to look at as to whether or not you're looking at a true butternut or a non-hybrid butternut tree as opposed to being a hybrid. Butternut will hybridize with Carpathian walnut, which is also known as English walnut, and also Japanese walnut, and it also will cross with those hybrids. So when you look at this tree, you know, without doing DNA determination, which may not be available, or you may not want to do that because of the cost. You look at other characteristics. And so things to look at, like the tree will produce flowers in the springtime, so it produces male catkins. So the catkin length can be something to look for. They suggest if it's something that's very long, so 14 centimeters or longer, that typically means it could be a hybrid. If it's 11 inches or shorter, it's probably a butternut, so that's one thing to look at. You also look at the leaf scars. It's difficult to see the leaf scar when the leaves are still on, but once the leaves drop and the branch dries a bit, you look for a butternut tree, you look to see whether there's notching. So notching in the top of the, and it's mentioned in here, there's a picture in here, but it's just basically the top of the leaf scar. If there's a bit of a notch there, that's probably a hybrid. So typically, if it's a hybrid, hybrid or anything, 40 centimeters or longer, so a very long leaf. Butternut is obviously shorter than 40 centimeters. Nuts in the cluster. So when flowers, the female flowers are produced, and the seed, you may find a cluster. Like typically with butternut, it's like 2, maybe 5 clustered, but with a hybrid, it's more than that. It's usually 6 or more. So that's something else to look for. But the thing is, you got to come out and look at the tree. Like you come out in the springtime, you see the catkins. You come out early June, you see the nuts starting to show, and through July, August, they enlarge. So how many clusters are there? In the fall, when the leaves drop, or in the wintertime, if you can get a branch and take a look at whether or not there's notching on the leaf scar that's showing on that picture, it means it's a hybrid. If it just has a straight top along the leaf scar, and also it holds on to it. If it's a hybrid, it produces a lot of seed every year. If it's a hybrid as well, it may not drop its leaves till later in October, and they'll drop as green leaves. Typically butternut, they start to yellow in August. They start to drop in August and into September. So it's something else to look for. And the fact that there's not really any canker. A lot of times you don't see any canker on the hybrids. And that's why, this tree, this is an example, as I was saying earlier, I think to somebody, that it's not typically what you find in the forest. 90% of the trees you come across when you're out looking for butternut and doing assessments, you don't find many of these types of trees. And so this would be a tree that we could possibly use for recovery efforts, like for scion collection and doing grafting work. So we would want to come in, and with this tree, once we know it's a true butternut and we do DNA on this one, this is what we would like to do, and make sure that it is a true butternut. We would come in here and collect scions out of the top of the crown in March, and then do the grafting work in April. And
are you looking for candidate trees, and how much is the DNA testing, and who would pay for that?
So we are looking for candidate trees. We're always on the look for, and if landowners have butternut trees on their property and they see that they're healthy looking trees. We have been doing DNA with the M&R's lab up in Sault Ste. Marie. The Ontario Forest Research Institute has a lab up there. They've now stopped doing DNA.
Why?
I don't know. I think it's just a change in their focus. So, but up to about 3 years ago, also staff have retired. I think that's also part of what's happened. So now, Precision Biomonitoring is one of the companies down in Guelph that's doing DNA tests. So we're going to try them out and see, and I think the cost is around $120 per sample to do a DNA test, and we, Forest Gene would pay for that to be done. if it's a tree that we're interested in. So, like, I mean, I'm not suggesting you send your samples to us and we'll fire them off. It's that if you've got a tree like, as Andrews have shown me, and I said, wow, this tree, you know, we could probably use it for our grafting and recovery efforts. So we'll be sending off a sample from this tree and possibly coming back in March to have an arborist climb up into the crown and drop branches that we can, small branches that we can then take off what we call scions, so just like six or 8 inch long branches that we then use for our grafting program that we do in April.
And do you, I'm pretty sure I saw something where there were certain parts of Ontario where you were still looking for material, other parts you had,
Yeah.
you know, pretty good coverage,
Yes,
because you
exactly.
want genetic source from
From
a
a-
wide range of areas. So is the Kawartha area one of your areas that you are still looking for material?
Yes.
Or it is?
Yes,
Okay.
we still are looking, and to the east up here,
Yeah.
we've got a lot of stuff in the Simcoe County, but what we're also wanting to do is look in Grey and Bruce and
west.
Huron County.
That's west.
Yes,
Sorry.
sorry.
The other east.
Yeah, but I mean east here as well, east of Peterborough and areas, down along Lake Ontario. We're looking for sites down there. But yeah, there's a big area there that we haven't gathered very much material. Is in Grey and Bruce.
Corey, if we want to continue encouraging good health in a specific tree, is there anything we can do in terms of like,
Yeah.
you know, cleaning up underbrush or trimming or anything like that?
Absolutely. So underneath, so when we do the habitat study, those to see what's growing around the tree, primarily, right? Again, here there's not that much from a ground or shrub level, and the tree's obviously higher than what would be down here, so that's what we want to see. It's already past this point of getting started out. So now it's okay, what's going to fight it for competition? You have the pine in the back, you have an oak over here, right? So again, dappled light is good. You don't want it to be just in straight sun all by itself. It doesn't like it, doesn't like the wind, and dry out pretty quick. So fitting would be a good thing. Again, you have a pretty mature tree here with the oak. You're kind of stuck with that. Maybe the pine over time would have sacrificed something like that to get a little bit more. Just enough that it can continue to get up there and get to the top of the crown.
Does airflow matter? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and again, think about diseases, right? So canker is not going to like a wet environment. Or, sorry, it's going to like a wet environment. So if we can keep it dry around the tree, especially in the crown, it would help. Right?
So and so this is talking about retainable, non-retainable. When we do butternut health assessments, we categorize through the process. Is it a class 1, 2, or 3? 1 being non-retainable, so something that you can take down. You know, if you had it assessed on your property, or on a development like the 407 or something. I use that as an example because they took down quite a number of butternuts, and we actually were able to come in and take scions and capture that genetics of those trees. So that was good, but the trees are gone. There was no doubt they weren't going to leave them with a buffer of any sort, but the buffer is good. So this is a good example. So I say like this is what I would consider, without doing an assessment, there's very little sign. When I was in here about 2 weeks ago, it was very dry. There's a little bit of sootiness, but I didn't find any open cankers. I didn't see anything on the bowl. Usually what we do is we look at the root flare up to 2 meters from the top of the root flare, which I'd say would be about there, 2 meters up. We count how many cankers, how many sooties, and then from that 2 meter point up to the first live branch, and typically it's quite a ways up, but this tree must have been more out in the open, and you can see all the branching. Like this isn't something to worry about, these dead lower branches. That's not unusual. A butternut will do that. But so then you go from your 2 meter mark, which I'll say about here, up to your first live branch. You also want to see how many sooties and open cankers there are, and you count all that. You record that all on a form, and then you run it through this little program that we have, which I forget the name of it right now, but it's like an assessment, and it'll spit out and tell you, is it a category 1, 2, or a 3? For this to be a category 3 tree, which they talk about like an archivable tree, and did have a little bit more protection. It has to have another butternut nearby that's heavily cankered within 40 meters. So I'm not sure if we're 40 meters from the big one over there, but I don't think there's any other trees around here. But I would still, you know, this would then be considered a Category 2 tree. So here's another example of butternut on the property. So I thought I'd just talk about the assessment, like I was mentioning the other site there, where there was very little canker and root flare, and doing the assessment protocol that we would follow. You can see, I was concerned again, it's a little bit damp, so some of this this wouldn't be the ideal day to do it, or maybe a little bit later if it was to dry out a bit more. But you can see the canker at the base, at the root flare here. So we assess the tree, how much live crown is there. It's a little hard to see up with the maples around there. So I'm not sure, Eleanor, what would you say the live crown percentage would be for this?
Oh,
there is some dead branching, like some of the major branches are dead, but appear to be without leaves. Although this isn't, sorry,
I was going to say something like 50%.
50?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And the other thing too is we don't do assessments in September. You usually do them early June till end of August. That's the ideal time. There may be some leaves have dropped out of the crown, you can see on the ground. So this isn't the time when you would want to do a true assessment, but we're here in September. So we'll say 50% or 60% live crown with the amount of leaf that you can see. And again, just remember that there's a lot of leaves on the ground here. Then you look at the root flare. So the root flare is basically from here up to about that area. And you would go around this tree, and you would count how many sooties, but also how many open cankers you've got. And you would record that into onto your sheet, your root flare, sooties and canker. Then you would do the 2 meter, so basically from there up to 2 meters, so possibly I'm about, you know, a little bit further than what I can touch there. And you would do the same thing, go around the tree, you would count how many sooties, how many open cankers you've got, and then go from that 2 meter point up to the first live branch. So that's quite a ways up there. And again, you know, yes, you would estimate that distance. And we use binoculars when you want to look further up on the tall trees. And you know, if you're not sure, then don't count it as a sooty or a live canker. If you're uncertain, you want to swing a little bit further or be a little generous to the tree, and also do the diameter. And all of that information then goes into what I was mentioning earlier, is called a butternut retainable tree analysis spreadsheet, and all that information is inputted into it, and then it will calculate for you whether or not the tree is retainable or not retainable. But as I mentioned earlier, a retainable tree is also considered a class 2 or class 3, or sorry, category 2 or category 3. It's to be a category 3, you would then, when you do your assessment, you're also looking at what's surrounding here. If there's any other butternut trees nearby, if there's a heavily loaded, canker-loaded tree within 40 meters, you record that, and that would then decide that whether this tree is considered a category 2 or a category 3. And then you just move on to your next tree. When I did run this, I thought this was a little bit more healthier than when I first looked at it. I mean, it's still a healthy tree. It still has leaves on the crown, but this tree was not retainable by just the amount of canker load on it. And you can see, if you want to come up and take a look, there's quite a bit of it showing on the tree all the way around here.
There's one next door, and so we just, we need to.
But I mean, it's not a tree that I would take down. I mean, there's no reason, you know, it's a, it may produce seed. There's like no real reason to discriminate against the tree. Does anybody want to have a look at?
I was going to point something out for identification purposes. The bark, sorry, has a canoe shape to it that you can see even on the last one you could see it. So that's something helpful for identification if you have a tree that you're not sure about. There's other trees that have a braided type of bark, but that shape is sticks out to me. So that's something I just was going to point out.
So we'll take our 6 to 8 inch cutting. The arborist will get a branch for us and take it down. Once we get those, we keep them in cold storage, and we obviously want to have good buds to work with. We don't want to have insect damage or dead tissue on there if possible. When we get it back to the greenhouse, come late April, early May, we start to graft. So we pot up rootstock in the fall, black walnut. Usually it's 2 feet in height, roughly, about 1/4 of an inch to just under 1/2 of an inch in diameter. We don't want anything that's too big and round because it's a hard time for it to set. If we get it too small and it's very flimsy, it won't set either. So something around that 1/4 inch mark tends to work fairly well. And again, lots of bud growth on it. When we're cutting, it's just a side graft that gets put on. So we match it into the actual walnut stalk and then we wrap it in a film. So that's a paraffin wax film that keeps that graft, keeps moisture in it, allows it to heal by itself naturally and callus around the wound. That can take anywhere up to like 2 months. So we keep an eye on that. If it starts to get too wet, it can rot out. So we have to literally check it daily. Sometimes we take the film apart, clean it a little bit, put the film back on, and just kind of monitor it over that time. And again, watch for insects, things of that nature. When the wound heals, it should look something like that. So good, solid contact between the butternut and the walnut, so that you have good cambium connection and it starts to have all the nutrients grow into the actual scion. And then once it starts to grow out, it turns into an actual little tree, right? So then we keep them inside the greenhouse. And this will stay here for the first year, for this summer. It'll go into cold storage, and next year it comes out again, we monitor it, and start to prune it into shape the way we want it to before it starts to go to the field, into the archives, okay? At this point in time, again, it's just watching for environmental factors, insects, mite damage, that kind of stuff that we want to keep up on. We try to use as little pesticides as possible, so we do a lot of hand picking. Once the trees are to a size after 2 years, they can go into the archives, and they start to look like this. That's a little bit bigger, but again, good leaf growth on it, good structure, and we want a good solid graft that's not going to fail over time. And if we're lucky enough to grow into full-size trees in the archives, these ones have been here since 2008 to 2012-ish, for those ones, right? So they do grow fairly fast, but we do find that they're kind of a low-growing, wide-spreading habit versus growing tall like we see here where there's competition trees around it, right? They are in the open, so they are more susceptible to things like wind and sun and snow loads, so we have to keep up on that as well as pruning them so they don't get too big.
And deer?
And deer. We don't get deer because we have them all fenced off,
Okay.
but we do have porcupines. So porcupines we have to trap pretty much daily at our area and let them go, relocate them because they get in there and they can make a mess in a hurry. So we've had skunks in there, we had groundhogs this year, so things like that you gotta watch for, yeah, for sure. And then if we're lucky, fortunate enough, this is our oldest tree, that's a 2008, so that's when we got seeds off of this year. So we ended up with 3,000 seeds in our archives in Kempville that we planted out, so half have gone to Greg, he's going to be putting down in his archives, and half we have in Kempville right now. So hopefully by next year, if the squirrels don't get at them, we'll have lots of new seedlings to come up and be able to have homes for them in the near future. So that's where you guys come in. So hopefully if you guys are interested and you know people that are keen on keeping species alive and doing the right thing with them, that's what we need to look for. So a lot of seed set. and then we come back at the appropriate time and collect the seed. During that process, though, we do want to see if the seeds are developing properly. So these are really hard because they're butternut. But basically on the inside, we want to see that the embryo is complete inside the cavity, right? Sometimes you get insects inside there that eat everything on the inside, it'd be no good, or mush. You want to have a full embryo. That's basically the whole size of the nut, right? And again, that's what I was talking about for the first couple of years. While the tree is growing out in nature, it's going to use all those stores to help that tree grow for the first 1, 2, 3+ years. After that's all gone, and it's just the tree by itself, that's where we'd have to make sure that it has the right growing conditions to flourish, right? So, if you're collecting your own, these are kind of hard to cut. But if you can't cut them, then yeah, it's always good to take a cut test and see what you have before you start. Because there's no sense in spending lots of time and energy if it's not going to be worth it. Right?
And then you just plant them the way they are?
Yep, just sideways on the ground.
Sideways?
In the nursery, like I said, we usually put them like literally a couple inches apart.
Right.
If we're doing high production.
Yep.
Out on land, you can put it, space it out a lot farther, obviously. Right. Sideways like that is fine. Cover it with about 1 inch of soil on top, right? Good compost, that kind of stuff. The organic matter. And if you can at all, cage it for the first little while to keep the squirrels out of it. That's the best thing to do.